Hello and welcome to another episode of Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth, the CPA's podcast looking at some of the most critical issues facing parliaments and parliamentarians across the world today. This episode was made in association with the Human Coined podcast, hosted by Geoff Dubrow, founder and principal consultant at Nexus PFM Consulting Inc. This podcast looks at the nexus between public financial management and the work of elected representative bodies such as parliaments.
This is Human Coined, a series that unpacks the mechanics of public finance, the complexities of democracy, and the societies they ultimately shape. I'm your host, Geoff Dubrow. Join me in a social dialogue that cracks open important issues that are too often ignored here at home and around the world. Juan Watterson, Chair of the Public Accounts Committee of the Isle of Man. Welcome to Human Coined.
Thanks for having me.
Juan, as you know, we're doing a series of interviews around the topic of public accounts committees in small jurisdictions to try to look at some of the challenges that small jurisdictions face when it comes to parliamentary oversight and particularly the ex post phase. So let's start. Maybe you could tell us a bit about your public accounts committee.
Sure. Our Public Accounts Committee is a committee of 6. It's made up of a chair and a vice chair elected by Parliament, sitting in its joint session with the upper and lower house sitting together. That's how I, as Speaker, am able to be both Speaker of the lower house and also the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. And then it brings together the chairs of other policy review committees. So the work of government is split up into like Environment and Infrastructure Policy Review Committee, Social Affairs Policy Review Committee, Economic Policy Review Committee, Constitution, Legal Affairs and Justice. So the chairs of those committees will sit with the chair and the vice chair to make the 6-person Public Accounts Committee to scrutinise the whole of the work of government.
And what is the quorum for the committee to meet?
It's a quorum of 3. And again, given we have quite an inbuilt model of consensus government, party politics is not a big thing here on the Isle of Man. So most members are independent. 21 of the 24 members of our lower house are independent, and all the members of the upper house are independents. So you don't have the party lines problem, but we still obviously have a government and scrutiny is how we like to think of it, rather than government and opposition. Most people will serve some sort of office in government. So when they're all doing their PAC work, they can't hold an office in government and a PAC office that would conflict. But this sort of strange sort of schizophrenia does sort of work quite well, but it does mean that sometimes members sort of have to sit out certain parts of discussions in Public Accounts Committee. But that's one of the things that we have in small parliaments, where you have conflicts of interests, that people who had been ministers are now no longer ministers but can't scrutinise their own work, and these sorts of issues. It's just inherent in having small numbers.
Now, when we talk about the challenges around public accounts committees in small parliaments, as you know, one of the things we talk about is the lack of what we call backbenchers, which are government MPs that are not ministers, but also opposition MPs. It doesn't sound like that's a problem in your case if 21 of the 24 members are not in cabinet.
Oh no, 21 out of 24 not in parties.
Not in parties, I'm sorry. Okay.
So the Council of Ministers on the Isle of Man is 10 members. And in addition to those 10 members, there will be other support acts, if for want of a better expression, junior ministers, you might call them, but not bound by collective responsibility. So they will support the minister. They'll be basically on an apprenticeship and can do scrutiny work of other departments whilst working in some other government departments. So it seems quite complicated. It actually it's really quite simple when you get down to it. But so the number of politicians is also helped by the fact that there's a statutory limit on the number of ministers that there can be. And that helps make sure, and there's a limit to the number of members that there can be in a department. And therefore that makes sure that there are enough members free to fulfill the scrutiny work that Parliament needs to do as well.
I see. Okay, I misunderstood. It sounded for a minute like your ministers were not members of Parliament, which of course would be very much outside the Westminster model, but that's not the case. Okay, so are your members of PAC are all backbenchers?
Yes. So there's you are not, understanding orders of Parliament, you're not allowed to serve on the Public Accounts Committee if you're a minister.
And that's in the standing orders?
Yes, in the standing orders. You can't be a minister or a member of the Treasury Department.
Right. Interesting. So, because we do see in the Caribbean many examples where ministers are members of PAC, and that does cause a lot of problems. I don't know if they have those statutory limitations. That may be one solution for of the number of ministers in cabinet.
It's a hangover from 1861 when the UK set up the Public Accounts Committee there and put a junior Treasury minister on it purely so they could get the minutes. And it's some parliaments have gone off in different directions with that ethos, but the idea I think still is that it's a scrutiny function, so you cannot possibly effectively scrutinize a body that you're part of. It's the self-review threat for those auditors out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, if I understood correctly, then you've got committee chairs that are members of PAC.
Yeah, so in many other jurisdictions, you might find that there's a liaison committee that will draw together the chairs of all the scrutiny committees.
Absolutely. Yep.
We basically do the same thing all within PAC. So that PAC will not only do the Public Accounts Committee work, but it will also act as the liaison committee between those scrutiny committees and sort of coordinate the approach to scrutiny in the Parliament. So it fulfills both of those functions. It's quite a neat arrangement.
And has that been the case for the full time that you've been in Parliament?
Yeah, it's the system I designed in 2011 with
Okay.
as in my first term, actually, and then it went into action. And unfortunately, I then got the call to go and be a minister, so I wasn't able to take part in it for the next 5 years. So it's great to sort of see that it survived the test of time. It's coming up to 15 years now as the system of the way that the PAC has worked. The Isle of Man Public Accounts Committee is far newer. It's only 40 years old. And so we've sort of been on that journey of evolution, perhaps a little faster and a little later than many others.
I was wondering why they called it the Watterson system. Now I understand. I'm just kidding. Now that's very interesting, though. And does that mean that the other committees are actually active? One of
Yes.
the things because there's this, the term paper tiger committees, of course, right? Gets thrown
No.
around a lot.
No, each of those, they're small committees. So each of those committees that I've mentioned are committees of 3. And the chairman then comes on to the PAC, but they are quite small committees because we don't have huge numbers for having big committees. So it does need to be small. PAC is the biggest committee in that scrutiny world, but it does work. It does work quite well. And the committees that sit under the PAC there are active. They will meet normally monthly, and the PAC, a bit more active, will meet twice a month on the Isle of Man.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's not a model I've heard of before. It sounds like you have a good working practice there. In particular, around the fact that you've got committee chairs who would hopefully be a little bit more devoted and focused. And I don't mean in your context, but in general, than perhaps a part-time member. Are some of your members part-time?
No, all our members are full-time and they're paid as full-time members. Some do take on government responsibilities, others don't. But generally speaking, they are full-time politicians, they're considered to be, yeah.
Okay, so I'm doing the comparison with the Caribbean, where, of course, a lot of members are part-time. When it comes to the issue of research or analytical capacity, that's, of course, one of the challenges that many small parliaments face, is not having the capacity to review the Auditor General reports, to conduct follow-up. How does that work in your context, in the context of your parliament?
We don't have a massive clerk support. We've got an assistant clerk, and I get about a quarter of her time, and the PAC clerk, I get about a fifth of her time. The PAC clerk is also the clerk to the upper house, and the assistant clerk is clerk to a number of different committees as well. So we have to share resources. We're a relatively small parliamentary staff of 25 to cover the whole work of the whole Parliament, from member support through to research, through to table and Hansard and everything. So we're quite small like that. So it is a bit of a tight system, especially when it comes to writing reports, because that's something that we heavily rely on the clerks for. The good thing about having members full time is that members can then be expected to do a bit more of the heavy lifting. So as chairman, I would probably be doing a little bit more than many other chairs would, just by virtue of it being a small team and wanting to get the best out of it and make sure that everyone sort of leans into their talents.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think I felt for a long time that with respect to the Caribbean, that model of part-time members may have worked very, very well earlier on when maybe government and governance was not so complex. But I can imagine that's a real challenge for governments, for parliaments where you have mostly part-time members.
Yeah, I mean, complexity and just the speed that things happen at are enemies, really, of being able to do things in that sort of slow time that things were done in. And full-time members really on the Isle of Man are a relatively modern innovation as well. Until maybe sort of only 30 years ago, it was considered part-time, and it was pretty standard that members would have other jobs, would be here on sitting days, on committee days, but that wasn't full time. That expectation has had to change in a modern democracy where things happen pretty fast, and the world is just so much more complex.
Absolutely. Let's talk for a moment about your operations. So when it comes to the Public Accounts Committee, it comes to your meetings, what are you reviewing? Is it the annual report of the Auditor General? Is it performance audit reports? Tell me a bit about that.
Well, it's changed. It's changed, and it's changing. So it's a really exciting time here on the Isle of Man, because I fought for a long time to get an Auditor General. We didn't have one. We were one of the last bastions in the world not to have an Auditor General. Basically, the audit of government was farmed out to a big four accountancy firm, and that report was laid straight to Parliament, and there wasn't an Auditor General. That has only changed in the last sort of 2 years. So we are expecting this year the first performance reports from the Auditor General. Big changes to the way that audit works in that review. So it's going to be a really exciting 12 months ahead as we go through that first cycle of Auditor General approach. And having had the office just set up relatively recently, we've all been able to go on that journey together as a PAC. We're looking forward to that first performance report. We've had one on public audit, really big, beefy document about the changes that need to happen to legislation on the island, because some of that goes back to 1958 and it's really quite archaic. So that's in the process of coming forward as well. We're going to have new bills to bring that forward in the autumn. So a busy time for the PAC.
And now that you mention it, with my memory is getting worse with age, of course. But now that you mention, I do recall during our workshop at the Small Branches workshop, which your Parliament so kindly hosted, there was discussion of the fact that there were some jurisdictions without an Auditor General. Do you recall any of the other jurisdictions by any chance?
We were in a very, very exclusive club. I think there were fewer than 6. There's Guernsey. Then it was down to Uzbekistan and North Korea. I think we were in that sort of in those sort of realms of governance. So I think that was what finally got the proposal over the line in Tynwald. That this was not really the Guernsey aside, not quite the company that we wanted to keep.
I believe I can understand that. Yeah. I could make lots of jokes, but I'll stay focused here. No, that's very, very interesting. So so what was the PAC reviewing before before the Auditor General office existed?
Public Accounts Committee would tend to look at internal audit reports, which is unusual. Obviously, those would normally just stay within departments. We were using those not really as Auditor General reports, but more as intelligence as to what was going on within government, what areas were risky, where things were falling down. And the other area was we would self-generating reports. So the committee would actually pick up a theme, research it as a committee with the help of the clerks. Obviously, these take a lot longer when you don't have any full-time resources. So it would take us 2 years to report on something relatively minor, just because of the process you have to go through and gathering the evidence. And it's not just a case of going in and doing a week's worth of field work as an Auditor General staff. You're actually sort of having to do that correspondence with the departments back and forth, having the oral evidence hearing, waiting for the Hansard, and then producing the report. So I anticipate that whoever succeeds me as the next PAC chair is going to have a steady stream of Auditor General reports to work from, and that's going to be far more in keeping with what most Commonwealth parliaments will be used to. But that's still something that's just standing up at the moment on the Isle of Man.
Were there any audited financial statements being provided to the PAC?
Absolutely. So the
Consolidated statements?
yeah, whole of government accounts have been produced in the Isle of Man for many, many years, certainly back into the 19th century. But that's another topic for another exciting day. But they were externally audited, laid before Parliament, and the PAC might pick them up, but they wouldn't necessarily routinely pick them up. It was in the remit that we could, but it was very hard to get both the member engagement around that and the public interest in that. So that didn't tend to be an annual feature in the way that it often is.
Interesting. Okay. And so the new Auditor General's office is going to be conduct performance audit reports as well. Is
So
that part of its
yeah,
mandate?
so the idea being that the public audit would actually largely continue the way it has been. It would be outsourced to firms in the market on the Isle of Man, but they would report back to the Auditor General instead of reporting back to the Treasury Department in government. And the Auditor General would then both scrutinise the work of the auditors as well as the audited accounts and provide a certificate for that for those accounts to go to Parliament, and it would be the Auditor General who would actually end up laying them before Parliament. What will then happen is that we will then have far more experience in terms of being able to question those accounts and bring Treasury in and answer some of the questions around that in the way that previously. Frankly, only that I'm a chartered accountant myself and had been government
Right.
auditor in the past,
Right.
we were able to sort of be able to have the technical expertise to sort of put those sort of questions together. So we have done that in the past, but it wasn't something that members were really able to participate in as fully as they might if they'd had that expert resource, which they now have.
So this gets back to the issue of small island capacity. It sounds like you'll be starting off with a fairly small audit office.
Yeah, it's one Auditor General, two Assistant Auditor Generals, and an Office Manager. It is, and that office has been tasked with, has been given the budget for both the previous audit work that was done, but also a value for money audit, performance audit budget as well. And the mission is to make a return on investment of more than the cost of that element of the budget within the third year. So we've got just about 12 months now before the Auditor General has to be able to demonstrate that they've identified more savings than that part of the government is costing.
And I don't know if you know me well enough by now to know when you see a smile like that on my face, it means I have a smart remark to make, which is wherever did they get that from? It sounds very NAO.
It's very NAO. I mean, the British Isles NAOs do a great job on this, and we've adopted some of that methodology in terms of identified savings. I mean, we've said we want it to be 100% return on investment within year one, so within 3 years. The UK NAO identify about a 10-to-1 ratio. They claim similarly in Northern Ireland as well. That would be a fantastic goal if that was achieved. But I think we've got to be realistic about we're getting started. But I reckon there's a lot of low hanging fruit out there that might be more likely to be achievable having had an Auditor General saying it rather than having a politician say it.
Sure thing. So if you don't mind me asking again, going back to the small island theme that we're talking about, what sort of was behind the decision to keep that office lean and mean in terms of the Auditor General and two Assistant Auditor Generals, uh, rather than trying to staff it up and having more of that audit capacity? Because if you look at some of the Caribbean countries, I think of Barbados, for example, they're going to do the central government work, right? But then when it comes to state-owned enterprises, the public enterprises, then they'll farm that out to the firms.
Yeah, so the central government audit will still be farmed out to the firms. That's a capacity issue, and we are very lucky on the Isle of Man. We have full employment. We don't have a big unemployment problem here, and so frankly, getting the staff, these are going to be people that will be importing to the island to do it. So we do farm it out to the firms, all of it. So local government work, central government work, public enterprises, that's all done by the market. The Auditor General will be quality reviewing that work, so it's an extra level of assurance for us. And I think that is the right balance for for us as a small nation with a good financial centre and plenty of accountants in the market. Now, there's some, for example, some of the overseas territories, quite small financial service sectors in their countries, may not have the breadth of accountancy services to be able to do that, and therefore are reliant on an in-house Auditor General staff to be able to do that. And say in those regards, we're quite lucky.
And I've worked for 2 accounting firms in my career, and both of them would call me up and be very angry if they heard me say that one of the issues that sometimes comes up is that the accounting firms don't necessarily understand the public sector and the public sector ethos when it comes to a performance audit, for example.
Yes.
How much of a concern is that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the performance audit just wasn't being done. I mean, that was the bit that the PAC itself was trying to do the performance audit, with basically one hand tied behind its back. So performance auditing was just not a feature of the Manx experience until now, and that's just not tenable. That's half of the job of an Auditor General is performance audit, and the other half is statutory financial statement audit. So. I think we've moved on a long way, and I'm hopeful that we're now going to sort of be able to sort of start benchmarking ourselves with others about what we're going to be able to achieve in that space.
Maybe we could just sort of take a more of a global view for a moment. Obviously, I think one of the things that you certainly bring to the table is your beyond your own experience in the parliament is your capacity to talk to others about and facilitate discussions with others about the experience of public accounts committees in small islands. What lessons do you take away from some of the other challenges that PACs face in small islands, and do you have any solutions in mind? I don't think that was on the list of questions, so that's kind of putting you on the spot, but I'm sure
Yeah,
you can handle it.
I think one of the biggest challenges that I've come across in speaking to other PAC leaders around the Commonwealth is getting those reports back in a timely fashion, especially around statutory audit. I've come across some countries that are 6-7 years behind on statutory audit, and frankly, that's useless. It's you are not going to get anything meaningful that far behind. In the Isle of Man, we have a tradition that the statutory accounts really should be before Parliament 6 months after the year end, and when it starts to creak on towards 9 months, there's questions being asked. There's a lot of pressure being put on the Treasury as to why that's the case. So, 9 months after the year end is a very reasonable time to be getting those published before Parliament. Ideally, then you're doing a hearing within 12 months of the year end and before you started the year after, so that those lessons can be picked out and embedded and put back into the system again before the next year starts. So that seems to me like a good way of doing it. Not everyone's got the resources to do that, and I think the balance is always about what are you getting in terms of quality versus what are you getting in terms of speed. And if you're not able to get both the quality and the speed, then you've really got to ask whether your audit department is fit for purpose. You really kind of need one or the other, and to move into too high a quality, you're going to be 7 years behind. It's no use to anyone, But if you can sort of maintain that sort of, we'll do what we can within the year, highlight the areas where it's not the evidence isn't adequate, and do focused and risk-based work, then I think that's probably the solution that people are going to need, so that they can at least sort of have a faster cycle of improvement rather than a long, slow non-cycle of non-improvement. So that would possibly be the advice I would give to those who are struggling in that area, perhaps.
Now, coming from a country, which is Canada, that has, 2 territories that are on the consensus government system, and seeing what partisanship looks like in our other legislatures across the country, federal and provincial and territorial, in the case of one of the territories, I can understand that may play a role. The fact that you have consensus government may play a role in the effectiveness of your PAC. To what extent do you think that's an issue?
Hmm. I'm not sure. I think what happens in those circumstances is far more dependent on the individual members. You get really, really good members, and you get members that perhaps aren't as engaged. But the people who want the jobs will try and get them, and people will sort of follow their areas of interest. In bigger countries, the whips will probably just to say, oh, well, we sorted out the leadership and now you're going to go on that committee, you're going to go on that committee, and you're going to go on that committee. Hopefully it'll align with your interests, but there's no guarantee in it. So in small jurisdictions, hopefully you're getting square pegs and square holes, but it's all about the individuals that get elected to the Parliament. On the Isle of Man, I think my biggest concern in terms of effectiveness of our PAC has been the churn. So I've been PAC chair now for admittedly a long time, 9 years, in the end of the last term, there wasn't a single person who started the term on the PAC that finished it, other than me. This time around, I might have 2 that finish the Parliament and having done the whole time. We're a bit of a victim of our own success, because the PAC is a really good breeding ground for finding out who's good, who's forensic, who's got an eye for detail, who can hold their own in a public environment. And we've had them all stolen away from us to become government ministers. So we have been victims of our own success in that regard. But it's a nice problem to have in a way, to know that we're doing an awful lot for the development of the individuals. So even though it's a frustrating chair of the PAC.
Yes, that is also a very Westminster, isn't it? What part of the Westminster culture of the PAC in the UK which is that it's a breeding ground for ministers, and many cases people don't serve as ministers until they've served on the PAC.
I mean, that's not been necessarily the case on the Isle of Man. There's not been a requirement to do that, but I think that has been a really real ground for talent spotting here on the island, especially. So hopefully it'll carry on, because it means that we're doing something right as the PAC, I suppose.
Makes sense. Just to wrap up, maybe you can talk about any future plans that you have, or future aspirations that you have in terms of democratic reform on the Isle of Man, or strengthening the PAC even further, strengthening accountability even further.
So we're 1 year out from a general election. That's next September. So really, my role is to make sure that we get these systems embedded. We do everything ideally right first time, and we embed those processes that have been put in by virtue of getting a new Auditor General. Make sure that we go through a full cycle then of reviewing accounts. And we lay the groundwork then for whoever comes after us on the Public Accounts Committee to say, well, how did the last lot do it, and hopefully follow that as a model of best practice. So one of the advantages of being involved in CAPAC, the Commonwealth Association of Public Accounts Committees, has been an ability to interact with PAC chairs from not just the region, the British Isles and Mediterranean region that we're in here in the Isle of Man, but across the globe, and finding different solutions to their problems. And that's meant that there's an awful lot of learning that can be extracted from elsewhere in the Commonwealth and brought here to the Isle of Man, and we're making full use of it.
That's wonderful. And should I ask if you're running again?
No.
No? Okay.
Don't ask.
Okay. Don't ask. Right. I was almost asking just to be comical, because it's sort of a famous question that people get asked right before an election.
And people have already started asking that on the Isle of Man. I mean, and it's not till next September. I mean, it seems like a long time out. There's an awful lot of water can pass under the bridge between now and then.
I'm sure that's the case. Well, Juan Watterson, chair of the PAC of the Isle of Man, thank you so much for your time and for your perspective. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Human Coined is an integral part of Nexus PFM Consulting. If you enjoyed this episode, you can also find us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions about the work we do, you can contact us at info@nexuspfm.com.